Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today in our inaugural first of many webinars through Element. I'm really excited. We're all really excited to be discussing the topic of credentialing, especially in the 2020s and beyond. And I'm very thankful and excited to have my two colleagues, Sheetal Tiwari and Mark Franco, on. If you want to go ahead, I'm going to pass things to Sheetal for introductions.
Oh, hello, everyone. I'm Sheetal Tiwari. I'm the founder of Global Certification Partners, and I help certification organizations to scale to new markets by assessing the market readiness, shaping locally relevant value proposition, and finding the right local partners and supporting the end-to-end execution. And I'm joining from Toronto, and I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Mark,
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Hi, everybody. Mark Franco. I'm a partner with the Rimon Law firm. I've been working with nonprofit credentialing organizations since 2003. I'm also chair of the Accreditation Services Council for the Institute for Credentialing Excellence. I'm based outside of Washington, D.C., and happy to be here.
thanks so much. Yeah, before we get started, I do want to ask if there are any questions that come up. Please feel free to use the chat function. We're going to go ahead and get to those at the very end. We have some time set aside. So we're ready. Well, let's get into it. We said the overarching theme of this conversation is globalization and moving your credentials to and expanding your brand in a global sense. So, Sheetal, I want to start with you. When you're looking at that, what and the changes that are impacting the credentialing space and everything going on globally, what are some trends that you're really seeing with the people that you're speaking with, especially
So I
post-pandemic? Yeah.
Post-pandemic, yeah, that's a nice question. And I think one thing we all can agree is that, the uncertainty that began during the pandemic, it hasn't really gone. Like it's simply evolved in different forms. Like even before the pandemic, the credentialing organizations were already responding to the shifts which are happening, towards the skill-based hiring, the emergence of micro-credentials, or even the digital transformations, which is happening in the assessments. But what pandemic actually did was catalyzed it, accelerated those trends. And if we see right now, one of the biggest macro level forces shaping anything globally, not just credentialing, is geopolitics. And so when we see the shifts which are happening in labor mobility or immigration policies or the national workforce strategies, those changes are inevitably influencing how credentials are recognized and valued across different economies. So I think we have to appreciate that fact that credentialing is part of this larger ecosystem. Like when we are already seeing the major universities and education providers, they are expanding into the regions like India, Middle East, and Southeast Asia. The education is moving, it is becoming portable, so credentialing cannot remain static. So that is, one of the driving changes. And the another major driver that is certainly not taking the back seat is definitely AI. And one of the key challenges I foresee is how we can effectively now validate skills in an AI augmented workforce. Like it's no more the question of, AI versus human. Instead, we are moving more towards a workforce where AI is embedded into almost every profession. So be it, we see this in different sectors, be it healthcare or finance or education. So the real question for credentialing organization is like in future is like how are you going to validate the competency in this augmented world? And I think these are one of the two major drivers which are defining the future of credentialing.
Yeah, I completely agree. I love that you talked a little bit about AI because it's almost like, you either adapt or you get left behind. And I'm reminded every day by my next door neighbor who refuses to use like an ATM. So, all of the points that you touched on, Mark, I want to turn to you. There's got to be some legal implications that you're seeing on your side, especially with, using AI, but not just that, the like expanding and post-pandemic trying to do everything remote.
Sure. Yeah. So the pandemic brought us remote proctoring, which was not really too much of a thing before, and it's been great as a vehicle to try and reach more people. But I'm really seeing now that we're 3, 4, 5 years into it, I'm really seeing a lot of challenges with respect to exam security and that delivery model. And you
Yeah.
know, it's the problem is, with sort of this global community that Sheetal's talking about, there's a lot of folks outside of the U.S. that are really trying to take advantage in bad ways of this delivery model. So there's a lot of challenges there. I don't think that they've been totally addressed as of yet. So, for folks that are using that model or considering using that model, I would just caution you to be very vigilant in terms of what folks are trying to do to either have proxy testing or to harvest your exam content or to use any sort of other assistance to pass your exam.
Mm, interesting. Yeah, it's kind of like an ongoing, progression there when you're looking at expanding, you want to make sure that it's secure and you're locking everything down. Um, we keep kind of dancing around AI. What are we seeing with AI specifically? Like we're seeing, AI proctoring, we're seeing AI in item writing. So what are your concerns and what are your like trends that you're seeing that are positive in this direction? Ashtal, I'm going to turn to you.
Yeah, I really like this question because, the conversation has evolved, Sean. Like, we are no more talking about remote proctoring versus testing center now. We are talking about AI-enabled proctoring versus the testing centers.
Mm,
And I would say, like, with this evolvement, like, there's no doubt that AI has significantly addressed some of the security challenges that traditional life proctoring faced. However, which I see, like, the biggest issues right now, it becomes with the transparency and data privacy with the use of AI. Like, if the organizations are failing to do their due diligence in understanding how the systems are actually using AI, they might be, just adding it through to their risk registry. So, because now, I don't know any of the vendors who don't claim that they are not using AI, right? It's in all of the remote proctorings. But the problem I see is the clarity and the transparency of what AI is actually doing in this process. Like, is AI being used just for flagging suspicious event for human review? Or is it, making automated decisions during the exam? Or is there still human in the loop? Because, we have like we already have AI agents now. Like, I think there is this vendor who has AI agent where they are using generative AI, and you can even get through without a human in the loop. So for organizations, this becomes very critical to decide, like, how much of automations is right for maintaining the real balance of, between the exam security and the exam experience for their candidates. So I think, just completely depending on what is best available without understanding of, of your own governance standards and, where you are ready to adopt this service, it's becoming very critical. Now, that's one part. And then, even about the data privacy piece, like it's important to know like who is owning all these candidate data, like, who is the data processor and how long it is stored. And are the vendors using your candidate data for, building their own AI algorithms? Now,
Mm,
and I think this becomes even more critical when your programs are testing minors, or you have candidates across different jurisdictions which have their own privacy laws. So I understand, like, there is this like it is alluring for the amount, the scalability which you can get through remote, through AI proctoring. It reduces the cost, but at the same time, as Mark mentioned, you have to be cautious and do your due diligence to understand where is your risk tolerance in having this, what I say, the harmony or balance between AI, remote proctoring, and with the testing center. And at the same time, I would like to add, like, we know that testings, there are organizations who have now, we have the examples who have now completely gone, stopped remote proctoring at all, and they have shifted to test, only testing centers.
right.
But I think it's not a one size fits all option. Like, when we talk about testing center, definitely they provide a controlled environment, a standardized infrastructure, which becomes, essential if there is you are dealing with high stakes exam. But it's also important to appreciate that not all testing centers are completely uniform either. Like, within the same vendor network, there are different tiers of facilities, ranging from, which are vendor owned property versus third party location. And even the quality of a testing center, it can vary depending on, which region it is operating in. And in certain regions where there, when you see globally, you might find it's like the testing centers would be more corrupt than going through, a AI enabled remote proctoring. So what I say, like, it really depends. It's a psychometric answer. Like, it depends for your program, it depends for your profession, it depends for, the region which you are targeting. And like that's why I say, like, the flexibility and having an a la carte of options through choose with is the best which you can do too, so that you are having, you're ensuring the test integrity, and at the same time you are, providing a fair and a trustworthy testing experience for your candidates.
I love it. You hit on a couple things. It sounds like what it comes down to when you're looking at expanding is really having that relationship with, the testing partner, the testing vendor, also your technology partners. But before we move from AI, Mark, I really want to get your take, from a legal perspective on the implementing of AI in the whole, testing and credentialing journey.
Sure. Yeah. One quote that I saw on LinkedIn that I think makes a lot of sense is you should never use AI for any decision making where you expect accountability. So, you know, I, I, I think there's still a long way to go for us to really understand how AI can be used most effectively, particularly with credentialing organizations. You really
Right.
have to remember that um, things that you put into I mean, depending on what kind of tool you're utilizing, those could live on in ways that you don't expect. They could be disclosed in ways that you don't expect. And so it's really important to know the limits and the capabilities of the AI tools you're using. You need to make sure that your use complies with your own policies, like your privacy policies. Or say, for example, you're using an AI tool to record somebody's test experience
Yeah.
and make determinations about any irregular behavior. You need to make sure that your policies allow you to be sharing that personal data with a third party. And then the other thing that people don't always think about when using AI is that the courts have already said that anything that's created by AI, that's not subject to any ownership claims. So if you're using AI to build your exams or create policies, I mean, there's potentially a very strong argument that you don't have exclusive rights to that content. So those are just some things to remember.
Just realized I was muted. That's really important when you're looking at, you said test writing, but that whole journey, right as I was leaving education in public schools, AI was coming in and kids were using that to write papers,
Mhm.
testing, and that basically that human touch where the teacher is going back and reviewing is was already there, but more and more with so much being used for AI, I really see a need exactly what you said, and I want to kind of steal that quote that anything with accountability you don't want AI making those judgments. So
Mhm.
um, I kind of want to move on from, because we're talking about globalizing your brand. I want to move on to discussing, like what would be a good way to start building a business plan, where I'm at an association looking to expand their credentialing program to maybe something in a smaller footprint, like, just if they're American based, US based, Canada, and Mexico, Sheetal, what do you think?
Uh, I think once if you are creating your business plan to go global, first thing it's I would say is having your readiness assessment. Like, are you ready to do this without, like I say, like first to do no harm to your program where you are running in the region which you are running. So only after understanding your why for going global, like why are you extending from the region where you have established now, what is your why of extending it to another region? That becomes important, and it is very unique to every organization. Like, are you getting more interest for your certification from candidates from different jurisdictions or different countries? Are you seeing more inquiries on for uh, for candidates taking your certification? So there are different regions where, or do you see that your professionals, they are they are practicing in a more global space, and the practice is some mostly it's similar. Like, even if the practice is very different, the scope of practice in your region versus where you are targeting, that again becomes not a good market plan to to go through. So it's like, I would say, like the first step is your own assessing your global readiness to take this move without harming your program, and then understanding, do you have the right resources or right people or the bandwidth to take because this is definitely a leap, like how you want to target, which regions you want to target. And going small, like if you have multiple certifications, taking one certification at a time, and in one country, and assessing how this is beneficial for your organization, and also the region which you are going through. Like, first you have identified your why, the second becomes the why of the region. Like, if the where you are targeting, why they will value your credential, why they need this certification, and do they even, is there even the understanding of how this certification will be valuable for like, with the employers for the career growth, or, for the intrinsic differentiation of, that you have specialized skills. So it, what I say, like, the value proposition which you will have in the region where you are operating might be very different to region where you are targeting. So that readiness, assessing the market readiness for acceptance of your credential, and how you can have a product mindset where it might be like, for through a different route where your certifications might be useful in some region where, it can be used for mobility pieces where, people can, take your credential and identify it as a differentiator for them to move to another country. I will give an example, like, currently we have like NCLEX available in different countries where someone wants to move and practice as a nurse in another country, they can take NCLEX in their origin country. But at the same time, if there is a specialty credential in nursing, which they can take in their origin country itself before moving, it acts as a differentiator. And it, it also reduces the brain waste of when they are moving to a new country, they already have a validated skill set. So I'm coming to this point because it's like it has to be in your business plan, that how are you positioning your certification in the regions where you are targeting? Do you have, the right stakeholders in that region? Do you understand, and are you ready to build the entire ecosystem around your certification? So
Mm.
having that ready and clear makes, it reduces your risk of when you are scaling your certification global.
Yeah,
So that,
absolutely. You've had some good good responses today. They're very thought-provoking because I'm thinking, just talking with you, I'm thinking, yeah, I remember that with one of the groups I've worked with, when they wanted to expand. But Mark, you've worked with quite a few nonprofits. I think not only just with PTC from the Pharmacy Technician Board, but
Mhm.
those groups, it's almost like a life or death situation with those credentials. You mess up, you could potentially kill someone, right? So the value is almost built in right there, right? Or at least I feel like it is. But when you're expanding globally, to add to Sheetal's point, like what are you wanting to kind of consider before just
Yeah,
immediately growing?
yeah. So still made a lot of great points. And I think it's good to have a very strong business plan like that. Uh, the thing that I like to talk about that's not always part of the initial conversations is um, great. So you kind of understand what the regulatory environment might be. You might understand what the community looks like. You might understand what the needs are. Um, but what are the practical realities of actually being on the ground doing those things? You know, so say that you go into a particular international market. If you had an exam breach, like how easy would it be to enforce any sort of you know court proceedings or lawsuits or some other type of legal action against some of those perpetrators? Like, is
Mhm.
the system easy to navigate over there? What are the time frames? What are the protections that you can put in place while those proceedings might be pending? Are the laws favorable? You know, do the people in the community do they appreciate exam security and integrity, or are they in a culture where they actually think it's more important to get people working? Right. So I think some of these, it's good to try and understand if there's any significant practical realities of going into a particular region. You know, how can you determine that? And I think the first way is you need to talk to people. local people, local attorneys, local stakeholders to figure out what it's like actually practicing a particular activity in that place, and then adding that in addition to your business plan to your conversations.
I love it. It's, for lack of a better term, boots on the ground with a new territory, a new area you're trying to expand. But not only that, I love that you talked about the culture and, really what it comes down to is we were talking about relationships with those that are involved in that credentialing. Maybe it's the educational institutions or the employers. So, these are fantastic points that we both are bringing up. So you've built moving on, we've built a business plan to expand into a new maybe like the European market or the Asian market. What would be my next steps? We have that business plan, and I'm going to mix it up. I'm going to go to Mark first.
Yeah, I think so. It's shoring up, definitely shoring up your policies. If you haven't reviewed them in a while, just making sure that they're appropriate for the type of um, regulatory framework that you may have over in that particular region. Um, Making sure that your policies will allow you to do some of the things that you may want to do over there. Like, for example, I work with a lot of organizations where they may not necessarily have set up their exam policies to do things like invalidate for a particular reason, let's say, right? And so, I think an audit of your policies is a good step to prior to moving into any particular reason. And then again, just looking at the capability for you to be able to enforce your rights.
Mm,
So if you have a certification mark, you know, making sure that there's a easy way or there's a way to register that over there. And then what is the practical reality of enforcing that use in that particular region? Those are some of the things that I would look at.
interesting. It's almost, we keep talking about the credentialing and the candidate, but it's really, a product that you are, protecting there while you're expanding. Um, Sheetal, what are you seeing? We've got our business plan. What would be, the steps to really show the value, grow that program?
So Sean, like as Mark mentioned, like it's very important to see whether you are compliant, in the regions which you are extending to, like what are the regulations there? Is like, is the practice more voluntary or, is it regulated? It's very different, based on like you will have your policies and your procedures and everything is in place, but is that relevant in the target country? Like, is that, does it hold any value there? Or will do you even have the rights to extend, to extend those policies in the region? What are the rights of the candidates?
Mm,
Even like in situations where, where things, escalate, it gets really tricky, and it becomes really tricky for the organizations to deal with when it also impacts, your accreditation. So that becomes like being aware, and for that it is really important that you need to have your boots on the ground. Like, you need to be aware of the local policies and local regulations, have, the local stakeholders, even have an understanding of the legal environment. And that becomes very critical, and because even and that is also, on a sustaining basis, because things keep on changing. The local, these, we are seeing a lot of changes, and we are in like, where it's not like if you formed a policy and it cannot just stay like that for like, 2 years or 3 years. If things have been changing in the regions where you are operating. So that becomes crucial. And when, as you said, like, when you have your business plan, the next it becomes what you have to do is you have to create the value propositions for
Yeah.
your credential. Because the business plan which you might create is based on, your understanding, your research, and, based on, whatever informations you are able to create. So it's what I say, like, it's very important to be like, 80% ready. That's what we can be. The remaining 20% is actually when you go in and when you try to, when you're trying to build those relationships and, scale in that market, you realize. So having that agility to adapt to things as come is becomes, really important when you are scaling your program. So I would say that, that agility and, being ready to adapt to whatever comes becomes, and, based on your risk appetite, becomes a really crucial thing when you are scaling globally.
Yeah, I completely agree. We kind of keep talking about being flexible. I think, Mark, you're kind of saying the same thing, being flexible and being agile as you're trying to grow. And that really comes with like modernization. We saw, on the software side, my side, GDPR came in and we saw laws coming in on the US side where we just had to be able to adapt and provide a solution there. I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about, that technology, especially it possibly being a barrier for the expansion globally. Sheetal, yeah, I'm going to pass it to you for that.
Yeah, because the technology piece, it becomes really important, Sean, because if you have your applicants, like that's where the first interaction begins, right? You have to submit your application. If the platform is, not ready to accept, there are different constraints which come, like if you have different fee structure, is the platform directing you to the right, the right structure of the fees? Then also it becomes like the eligibility criterias, it varies, like, organizations, they might have different eligibility criterias based on their US population versus their international population. So technology becomes, and, it brings in those automations. It becomes a crucial, and what I say, like, when, like, I draw it from the principle of when you are free from the daily, when you free yourself from the daily and, the operational task, you get the bandwidth to do the higher purpose, or the higher purpose in your life, like, the or higher purpose for your organizations. So that's why a technology which can take away the day-to-day things and bring in automations and bring in, the reliability of the trust of, bringing, streamlining the procedures, it gives you that bandwidth of using your energy not just in maintaining and building your platform and building your service, and take that energy and focus it more towards expanding, growing, and creating awareness of how your certification can, help in meeting the mission of your organization.
Hmm.
So I think,
Mark,
that piece becomes, I am like, I am very tech optimistic. I feel like, it just helps us to do what we could do better.
I think all of us on this call are tech optimistic, but I love that. Mark, you were, heavily involved with, that certification technology piece, in your nonprofit experience. What do you think about the state of the software market right now, especially when it comes to globalization?
Yeah, so back when I started working with credentialing bodies in 2003, there weren't really good vendors like there are today. I mean, there wasn't a huge focus on platforms that were uh, really designed to do what it is that certification organizations want to do.
Mm,
Um, Obviously, things have grown, but I think it's important that vendors really, you use the right word, that they really design their platforms to be nimble.
mm,
When GDPR came out, and it's been a while now, so folks have somewhat adjusted already, but when GDPR came out, platforms really struggled to
yeah.
figure out how they would configure themselves to comply with the GDPR requirements.
Mm,
The US isn't quite there with respect to a comprehensive data and privacy um, structure in terms of governance, but more and more states are coming online. And um, what we're seeing is that nonprofits are not always going to be exempt from
mm.
some of those requirements. So it's, you know, one of the things that I would really encourage organizations to do is when you're picking a partner, a vendor partner, any other partner, you really assess their nimbleness to be able to adapt to situations as they come up.
Basically, when we boiling down this conversation, it really comes down to relationships, right? Having a good relationship with your tech partner, relationship, as Sheetal and both of you said, relationship with the testing vendors and the people that have the stakeholders. When we're looking at, really selling the value and expanding, a lot of things come into play. You're talking about healthcare credentials that may need employer verification or, employers wanting that information on the constituent. So that's a tech side or a tech factor there where you're able to get that data to those stakeholders. You know, and we can kind of keep coming back to cultures. So, you know, um, I'm sure there's a lot more there to discuss, but, you know, what would you say, Mark, when it comes to really building that, building those relationships and
Mhm.
B, looking at really the value and protecting the value?
Yeah, well, definitely when you're choosing a vendor, you know, it's always different between talking to the folks that are trying to get you in the door and talking to folks that will work with you after you're there. And so that's one piece of homework that you really need to do. Similarly to how I was talking about understanding the practical realities of going into a particular international region, you need to figure out how you can assess the practical realities of eventually being in a contract with any particular vendor and having to work with them in situations that aren't always the best, right? So, you know, a new law comes up in Kentucky related to privacy, and all of a sudden we're subject to those laws. You know, what would be the process to make sure that we're compliant from a platform perspective?
Mm.
I think those kinds of things you want to know as soon as possible and not wait until that time arises to be having those conversations. So that means not just regular ongoing communication from your side, but you should expect a vendor that has regular ongoing communication with you from their side to make sure that you have everything you need to do your activities to the best way you can.
And it's crucial, as a vendor, you're coming in, there might be, like you say, a new law change in Kentucky. Us as vendors being, aware of those changes and bringing that attention to the client, that's only going to solidify the relationship and build trust because we want success, as opposed to just like, oh, maybe they don't know about it. We'll just not, we won't say anything. That's, a little underhanded, and eventually you're going to develop a mistrust with that tech partner. You really want it. You're in this together, you know, mutual success, right? Um,
Yeah, let me just say this, there's too many vendors that never reach out to
Uh,
their clients.
mm. And that's like, step one, right?
Yeah.
I want to, before we kind of talk about, ensuring success with a global credential, I want to talk about, a point that we kind of touched on, and that's a cost of certification. You know, I liked earlier, I can't remember who it was that said it, but we're talking about how it could be seen more as a barrier to employment and barrier towards a career, as opposed to, in America, we see this more as a feather on your cap. It's something to advance, individualistically your career and your place in the your industry and community. So, what could we do, going forward as nonprofits and as tech vendors to really help with with the cost of certification? Sheetal, I'm going to pass it to you.
I think, Sean, like it becomes like, I really loved, as you mentioned, and even Mark mentioned about, it's more of a partnership. Like, when an organization, like coming from there, leading an organization, a small size organization, for me, it was like really important to have that partnership between between the vendor, where it's not, where I need to know stuff which I don't know,
Right.
and that like that dependency for the that dependency and that trust becomes really crucial. Like, as Mark mentioned, like there are vendors who don't even show up. Like, it's there, the service is there, and then it's, we are here when you need us. But it becomes crucial for that relationship, because especially if you are running a volunteering, your certification is a volunteer based certification, your platform is what your candidates experience when they are doing their application, and especially when they are doing their recertification. I have seen, people being hesitant, or just saying like, okay, I am not doing this anymore because I don't understand how my CEUs are going to be carried forward. What happened
Mm.
to my how many continuing education units? These are the real challenges which sometimes, just frustrates the candidates, and they might even take the decision to retire
Mm.
or stop, stop recertifying. So that ease of use is really important. It is very critical for the the candidate experience to be provided. And sometimes not all the candidates are tech savvy. So
Mm.
the more the confusions, like, the more your platform is not user friendly and more and made for your customer, like your candidate profile, it becomes a challenge and it becomes a barrier where you have to even, there is automation, you have to provide, you have to have a staff to handhold them and complete the process. So I think it becomes really important to, as Mark mentioned, to be nimble, to understand and accommodate the needs of the organizations you are working with. So I would say that point, Sean, like, if that partnership on how we work together to
Yeah.
grow our program, to provide the best candidate experience, to provide, the best security, and, maintaining the legal and the compliance standards together.
I love it. Mark, before we kind of finish with our last topic here, is there anything you wanted to add with that, value and the cost versus
Yeah.
compensation?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that organizations tend to do is say, how can we take our program and basically drop it into another place? And I think maybe a different question could be, what are the ways we can take advantage of opportunities in another space? So maybe it's not a certification program. Maybe it's some other type of way of validating the
Mm.
competence and skills that the folks over there need to be able to get to work or do a job correctly or whatever it is. right? And so I think, you know, if you if if you have a place where certification um, doesn't make sense, that doesn't foreclose, I think, you to being able to figure out maybe if there's other things that you could be doing, right, over there. And so then that I think would have impacts on potentially lowering costs or lowering the barrier to entry to wherever you're looking. So that,
Mm,
you know, that's something that I always um, try and do as I step back and really figure out what is, you know, what are we trying to accomplish? And for the most part, it's not really just dropping our program into another region or country. It's trying to solve some sort of intrinsic need that's
right.
going on over there with respect to their workforce.
That's very, I mean, honestly, I think we could have like a whole separate conversation about this, but that's really difficult to really make sure and ensure. It's something that I think that for organizations, it should be an ongoing review process, maybe not every 5 years, maybe a little bit sooner than that, where you're really assessing that to ensure that those barriers are not in place to make sure that your candidates have access to those certifications. But
Mhm.
that really leads into ensuring success. I did say reviewing processes, but I'm kind of bearing the lead there. What are the both of you, like Sheetal, we're got this global program now. We're maybe looking to we're expanding down the horizon, but I want to ensure that what we have now, the markets that we're hitting now, have success before going on. What would you like? What are the main points that you would kind of focus on with that organization?
Sean, I would just, like to circle back to
Yeah.
what Mark mentioned, and it was beautiful. The thing which he mentioned, that you have to understand what gap are you filling in the region which you are targeting. It's not like, I am like we are doing this, we just take this and this will work. You have to understand whether it is needed. Are you adding value to where you are going? And if it's not the gold standard product which you have, it might be something else which you might be able to contribute and help and bring that change and fill that gap in the target region. So I would say under that is the success matrix, which I say, that intention of bringing and adding value to the region which you are going. And the thing is, like, I would also like to mention psychometrics, the science of measurement itself. It's like, it's a privilege and it's a luxury of high income group countries. In low income and in middle income groups countries, they are still, we have enough research to show that the assessments which happen in these countries are still not, they are not all meeting the psychometric reliability and validity standards. So
Mm,
if there is something which you can provide in the region when you are targeting, and you can bring in this differentiation with the quality of assessing someone's skills, that is that intention brings in, it shows the success which you will get in these countries.
yeah, I completely agree. Um, Mark, I'm going to pass it off to you now. We're talking about ensuring success with these, and I really like what Chital was saying. Really understanding the gap that you're filling. That's really the value that you would be bringing to those
Mhm.
stakeholders. But uh, do you have any other like main points that you would really want to bring up to really ensure success with those global programs?
Yeah, I don't know if it ensures access or success because that, that's um, sometimes can be hard, but um, on a regular basis, I work with organizations whose policies actually create more work for them.
Mm, okay.
So, you know, I can't stress it enough. You need to be reviewing your policies regularly and seeing how they're actually impacting the workflow. Okay.
Mm,
And there's ways to make policy that meets the law, that meets accreditation standards, and makes it possible for you to do things in a very efficient and effective way. And this, even the most sophisticated organizations, um, uh, we're still coming across ways to improve where they can be doing things from a policy perspective. So that's one thing that I think you would want to look at very strongly is just making sure that um, when you're going into a new area, that your policies have been set up so that all of a sudden you're not going to have just a whole bunch of extra work on your plate.
this is, I was just thinking we keep moving around, and with this one, with this topic, it seems like we've danced around several, but this one, like AI, and this one, it's more business continuity, right? You want to make sure that the processes, and it's exactly what you're saying, reviewing those on a regular basis to ensure that the processes you have in place are not barriers, that you're assessing what's coming forward so that you're not reactive, but you're more proactive, right? Um, I guess before we kind of turn to questions, any kind of like success stories with any of the clients that you've worked with in globalizing or just modernizing their processes. I'm going to turn it to both of you. Do you have any I guess stories for the group?
Yeah, I mean, like, so, I don't want to necessarily um, mention anybody, but I work with organizations that are
Maybe.
they're very successful um, working overseas. It does come with its challenges.
Mm,
Um, you know, mentioned the global impact of geopolitics right now. That's definitely had an impact, but I don't think that any there's nothing out there right now that I see as an absolute barrier
mm.
to considering bringing your activities to a global level. It just needs to be like anything else. It needs to be done in a very thoughtful way.
Yeah. I like that that's been the overarching theme, right? Being very thoughtful in deliberate in your strategic goals. That's really what it comes down to. Um, I do want to turn to the group if there are any, all of our participants. If there are any questions, please feel free. I have a couple here. Um, I know we were just talking about it, but either of you have like a specific country or specific region that you feel you're starting, maybe you're just national, you want to expand, like what would be an easy market to kind of look? I know we mentioned like Canada and Mexico. Would there be, in your opinion, an easy like first step there? I know it depends on the credential as well too.
Yeah,
Oh,
I don't think there's any such thing as an there's not really in my experience there's not really a region right now that sort of would be the most favorable. There are some that are easier to work with. I think, obviously the EU, there's some opportunities there. The Middle East is opening up a little bit in terms of, their uh, accessibility and openness to these kinds of activities. But I couldn't pinpoint any particular region right now.
I know the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers, they were looking at expanding, and I think they're in the process of expanding their credential to Africa and India. So, I mean, I can imagine that not just language barriers, but there's a lot of, especially in India with all the different dialects, but that's something that's like not going to happen in just a couple of years, and success is like tracked probably over decades versus over just fiscal years, right? Um, Next question I have, Sheetal, when you're talking with these organizations, what's the one, I guess, pitfall you would see? They're doing something and it's like, this is an old process, this is an old way of thinking that they can immediately remove to improve.
Yeah, so like I am seeing, or like, compared, like this is happening in the re with the recent disruptions, where I am seeing more openness now for within the organizations, because now, like, for years there were, like, there was this understanding where, you can be in a status quo, do business as usual, and you can still sustain. But with the current dynamics, and with you know the baby boomers, like, we are seeing a reduction in there is a fall in the recertification rates, and if it's not being balanced with the number of incoming candidates, the sustainability is at issue. So that is one of the reasons, and the other is, like, organizations, they don't want it's coming to the awareness that you cannot depend on a single region to sustain your business. So exploring other market is, it's more of a sustainability issue now. So I think that shift is being obvious with the kind of, the world we are in.
Yeah. And there's just been so much, on the global scale happening recently that um I think that that's, for me, one of the first things that you would take into account. I'm looking at expanding the region. What are the geopolitics? What's going on, especially U.S. relations? But um, I'm out of questions. So unless the group has any more, I think we're pretty much at time. So I wanted to stop there. Really appreciate um, Mark, Sheetal. Thank you so much for participating in the panel. You guys had some fantastic, fantastic points. I hope that the audience got something out of it. And to that point, if there's more, if you want to continue the conversation with any of us, you'll be getting an email with our contact information so that you're able to follow up with any questions that you had for us. But with that, I appreciate everyone staying to the end, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. Thank you, everyone.